Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us. You know, the end of the year is soon going to be here, and when it arrives, well, it's time to spend a bunch of money again, Darren.
We love spending money on the farm.
No, seriously, when it does come to the end of the year, prepaying expenses is something that farmers can do to lower the tax bill for this year. Not that farmers are going to avoid paying taxes. It's just pushing the tax bill off a little bit. It's a tremendous advantage that farmers have compared to most businesses. We'll talk about the details of that today.
Well, one of the things you may consider spending some money on is a new air reel for your combine. We used one for the first time on our farm this fall, and boy, did it make a difference in our soybeans, and it'll make a difference in small grains too. We'll talk about that today.
We've also got a Weed of the Week coming up later in the show, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
This week's Farm Basics is brought to you by SatShot.com. Satellites aren't just for NASA anymore. Use the power of satellite imagery to create variable rate management zones in your fields. To reduce input costs and increase yields on your farm, go to SatShot.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss probably the thing that frustrates farmers the most in terms of spending money. It's spending money on drying corn down.
Well, you know, we're standing in a particular cornfield of ours that yielded great this year, but it was a little wetter than we were hoping for this fall. And when you think about moisture in the corn, farmers need to get that moisture down to about 15% in the corn to be able to sell it at the elevator without getting docked or without getting part of the price discounted for excess moisture.
Well, the way I explain it to my little 7-year-old son is I just say, Zach, you know, in this kernel of corn, there's about 85% stuff and about 15% water. Okay, if it gets up to 20% water and only 80% stuff, it starts to go bad. It starts to rot and get mold and everything. And he's like, okay, Dad, I think I got that. And basically, what we're trying to say is, farmers have to have this corn dry to store it in grain bins, number one, but also to be able to sell it to a grain elevator, like Darren was saying, without a dock or a discounted price.
So how do you get corn to dry down? Farmers' preference would be to leave it out in the field and let the sun and the wind and hopefully warm afternoons dry that grain down naturally. Now, normally when you get later on into the fall, into November and into December, that corn dries down very little each day because there really isn't that much heat left, and you may see that corn move down slightly, but chances are the good drying days happened back in September and October.
So here's the thing. When a farmer is deciding what corn hybrids he's going to plant, he can plant what we would consider an early maturing corn hybrid or a later maturing corn hybrid for his particular area. So in other words, depending on the corn hybrid the farmer plants, it might reach maturity sooner rather than later. So if it reaches maturity sooner, obviously it's going to be drier in the fall. So knowing this, you might say, well, why wouldn't every farmer just try to pick early maturing hybrids for their area? But the problem is not all the early maturing hybrids will yield very well.
Well, when you think about it, if you've got a hybrid that takes a little bit longer to mature, if you get some favorable weather along the way or you get a late season rain, things like that, it has a chance to help that corn out even more. If your corn's already matured and it's done, and now it's just to the point of drying down and getting ready for harvest, and you happen to get some favorable late season weather, it just doesn't work out as well. So that corn isn't going to yield as well or produce as many kernels or as much kernel weight out in that field as a longer day hybrid. So you have to trade those things out. Yield versus getting it to finish out and mature in time to be able to harvest that year.
Okay, let's run through some specific numbers. Let's just say, for example, that a corn hybrid was at 22% moisture, and we needed to get down to 15% moisture. So that is 7 points difference of moisture. Well, what we figure for drying cost is 42 cents total if you're going to dry it down 7 points, because we're going to go 6 cents per point. So 6 cents times 7 is 42 cents. Now, if you have 200 bushel corn, like in this field right here, it was 200 bushel corn. Okay, you take 200 bushels times 42 cents. That is $84 an acre. $84 an acre. And we had 1,700 acres of corn on our farm this year. So I can't even run that math, but I mean, you're going to spend upwards of $140,000, $150,000 if all your corn was that moisture. That is a tremendous amount of money.
Well, if you're the fuel guy, Brian, you have to be pretty happy because, wow, they're going to have to buy a lot of propane to try and dry all that corn down. And then you look at, okay, the cost of drying. There's a couple different ways you can dry down. What a lot of farmers will do is use something like propane or natural gas, fire up a dryer that blows heat through the bin, and using heat and forced air, they can force some of that moisture out of those kernels and dry it down relatively quickly. The other way to do it is to put the grain in bins with just air running. No heat, just air. And you run that for weeks and maybe even months to try and dry that grain down slowly. As far as the quality of that kernel of grain, air drying is great. However, the disadvantage with air drying is you can't put 25% moisture in a bin and hope to air dry it down in time because, as Brian so eloquently put it to his 7-year-old, it's going to spoil before then. So you have this fine line of, okay, I can air dry it if it's maybe 17% moisture and take off a couple of points. That's no big deal. But if it's a little bit wetter, I definitely have to use heat and forced air to get that grain to dry down.
So it is a challenge for farmers trying to get relatively dry corn in the spring. It depends a lot on the year. Last year we had a relatively warm year, actually a very warm year around the entire country, so most corn was done early in the fall, so it was fully dried by the time the farmer came along to combine it. Well, this year was the exact opposite. Nothing got ready early, so there's a lot of wet corn this fall. Farmers had to spend a tremendous amount of money just to dry that corn down. Otherwise, they had to leave it in the field real late in the season, and the longer a farmer leaves the crop in the field, the more chance animals have to get it, or weather could come along, like we had a big windstorm that knocked down some corn late in October this year. You know, all these problems come about if you can't harvest until later on in the season. So drying the corn down is a huge issue on farms across the country, and unfortunately, so is our weight of the week. It's a problem just about everywhere. We'll tell you how to control it, though, on your farm coming up later in the show.
In all of us, there's a voice that says, I can do more. More with my time. More with my land. More with my business. And it's that powerful belief, that relentless drive, that productive spirit that's built into the heart of every machine we make. Case IH, for those who demand more.
Demand for corn, wheat, soybeans, sunflowers, and other ag commodities are in tremendous demand, and Quick Roots is helping producers fulfill that demand. Application of Quick Roots to your seed prior to planting allows your plants to increase root growth and increase nutrient take through a special enzyme process. The increased root growth from Quick Roots allows the plant to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots, because it's the little things that make a big difference.
In today's marketplace, maximizing your harvest is more valuable than ever. Improve the efficiency of your operation by adding a Crary Air Reel to your harvester today. A continuous stream of high-velocity air quickly feeds crop back to the auger, getting your crop off the cutter bar and into the header. This minimizes scattering and reduces the amount of header loss. At harvest time, every second counts and every bean counts, so you can count on Crary.
At Hefty's, we want your business. Here are 3 specific examples of how we paid our customers thousands of extra dollars in the last year. First, we had a fall fill program for Roundup, so our customers paid half price compared to today. Second, we secured fungicide supply before anyone, so we've got ample fungicide when others are out. Third, while most seed companies had low germination soybeans, Hefty brand soybeans stood out with high vigor, which will lead to great yields this fall. Our number one goal is always to make you more money on your farm, so give us a try.
We're Hefty, and we're big on the farm.
If you've been watching our show for a while, you know Brian and I are always looking for the newest thing to help us improve production,
Well, it
make
doesn't
more
have to
money
be the
on the farm.
newest, just something that makes money. That's what we want, something that makes money.
And we've got one obstacle on our farm besides Brian. It's our dad. He's in his late 60s, and you know, he just doesn't want to spend money anymore on the farm. And so we really have to study things and evaluate them on our farm a little bit before we can get Dad convinced, you know what, it's worth the investment.
Well, a lot of times we just spend the money anyway. If we know it's worth the investment, we're not afraid to take a few chances. But we want the farm to be getting better all the time. Well, anyway, it is rare when our dad comes to us and says we need to spend a bunch of money. But Darren was telling me
I'll tell a story.
Yeah, okay, you go ahead.
Well, I was talking to Dad a little bit about this, and we had some late planted soybeans this year because it was a really wet spring in our area, and it was tough getting everything in. So Dad was very concerned. You know what? Our beans aren't going to get real tall this year. We're going to have things that pod fairly low to the ground. We need an air reel on the farm, or we're going to have trouble out there. I said, really, Dad? You think it'd be worth the investment? He said, you know what? I think on those kind of fields where we plant late, where the beans are short and they're potted low, he said, it could be in an extreme year 5 more bushels of beans that we pick up. And he said, on a year like this, we could pay for an air reel in 1 year.
Well, we've got 3 different combines we'll use on soybeans, and there was one day this fall we had the other 2, the newer combines, running on some corn. So we decided to send the old combine out there with no air reel into some short beans. I went out there and I just said, no, this just isn't going to work. We got down there with the air reel. It definitely made a difference. Here's what we're finding with the air reel and why this is important. So it was fairly late in the season when we were cleaning up these wet spots. The beans were really short, so it was hard to get them to feed in to begin with. You just chew them up right at the head, right where you're cutting them off, and you end up with 2 problems. Some of the beans just don't go in. Some of the beans, as soon as you hit that crop and it's a little drier, if the beans are drier, they're going to shatter out of those pods. So with this air reel, what it's doing is it's forcing air, pushing those beans toward the combine. So anything that may be lost, usually before it hits the ground, it gets pushed with that air into the header and we catch those beans. It definitely made a difference.
Well, the other thing is it just keeps a consistent flow, and when you've got a combine and you're slugging stuff through, you just aren't doing a good job. It's not feeding in evenly, and you aren't maximizing the capacity of that machine. If you're using the air reel, it seems to force things in a little more even, so you end up with your combine working more efficiently out in the field as well.
So you can go maybe just a little bit faster, basically, hopefully have a little bit less loss at the header, just do a little better job out there. So, again, coming back to this spending money thing, we don't like to just spend money for no reason, but there are situations where there are some different things, different ways you can do things to help the whole process. In this air reel, in the beginning, I wasn't all that excited about it, but now that I've seen it run on our own farm, I just say, I think we might have to get 2 of those because we run 2 combines most of the time.
It's like everything else, especially with Brian. Oh boy, I don't know. I don't know if we should spend the money. I don't know what kind of return we'll get. And then all of a sudden he sees it and he's like, wow, this is great. We need to do it on all our combines and get going. So all of a sudden you kind of have to hold Brian back a little bit once he does get fired up about something. But we did evaluate an air reel on our farm this year. It was a successful test for us.
Yeah, but
this year in our soybeans, it did make a difference on the shorter beans.
Yeah,
getting stuff through.
The tall beans, though, I really don't think it made that much difference. So if all of your beans...
We didn't have any shattering issues, though, this year. Last year, there was a lot of shattering problems, and I think if we would have had it a year ago, we'd probably say something a little bit different.
Right, but we were combining our beans at 13 or 14%, and, we were there right when we needed to be. So there are just different situations there where it may not pay for you. So if next year happens...
It's not going to hurt you, though. That's the whole thing. You're not going to lose anything by doing it. You just may not have the advantage under ideal conditions. But if you get into something where it's a little less than ideal, so it could be a huge deal for you if you've got small grains, I would say the speed of combining is going to pay for itself every year. If you're able to go just a little bit faster, boy, that makes a big difference to get the job done.
Yep, you should have more time for weed control, especially if you've got our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to stop it coming up later in the show.
Hefties don't fool around. End of story.
Residue. If you have high yield goals, then you're going to have residue. Lots of it. Now what? Well, now is the time for the Land Commander 3 from Brilliant Ironworks, the leader in vertical tillage innovation. Think of the Land Commander 3 as a combination heavy-duty disc and parabolic shank ripper. Designed to handle even the rockiest of ground, the Brilliant Land Commander 3 features high-clearance auto-reset shanks to work through the heaviest residue without plugging. If you have high yield goals, then check out the Brilliant Land Commander 3 at BrilliantFarmEQ.com.
Circle the wagons. Circle your corn with effective, consistent in-plant protection. BT Yield Guard triples corn from Pro-Seed. Maximum roots and healthier stalks plus more uptake of moisture and nutrients. Broad spectrum weed control with a Roundup Ready system with convenience and application flexibility. Pro-Seed. Great seed. Reasonable price.
You know, one of the sayings that I always heard growing up was things always even out in the end. If you have a great year one year, you know, the next year you better save a little bit of that income that you make because the next year might not be so good. And you know, looking at these couple of years here, we had good prices for our grain last year or this past season, and we had opportunities to market our crop for a good price. And we had, looking at today's pricing, relatively low input
Okay,
costs.
that's enough talking about some of these things that are depressing. As crop prices have gone down, input costs have gone up. The fact of the matter is, on a lot of farms, for this 1 year, and maybe even next year too, but for this 1 year, farm income actually was pretty good. So rather than pay a big tax bill this year and then in the next couple of years not pay much of a tax bill at all, you as a farmer have the opportunity to basically income average if you want to. Now, there are different ways to do this. The way we like to do it and the way most farmers do it on their farms is by prepaying expenses. You see, as farmers, we're one of the few businesses that there are out there that can actually use a method of accounting called cash accounting. So if it's an expense and we physically have a specific product at a specific price in a specific quantity, we can deduct that fully from our income tax. Now, there are a couple of qualifications to this. First of all, you're not supposed to prepay over 50% of your total expenses on the farm. But those total expenses include depreciation. So if you figure all your total expenses, let's say you had $500,000 total expense on your farm this year, you can prepay up to $250,000. Now, please see your tax advisor.
Yeah, I was
not
just going to say, Brian
consultant.
is not a CPA, so let's just have that little disclaimer right now. But we do farm, and we're telling you some of the things that are impacting our farm that certainly apply to your farm as well.
You can prepay for seed. You could also prepay for chemical, fertilizer, any of those farm inputs that you're going to be using in your fields this next year. That's great. The only thing is you have to make sure you're paying, again, for a specific product at a specific price and a specific quantity. If you just give, let's say, $20,000 to your seed dealer, that doesn't count. You will not get that as a deduction for this year. It has to be specific items.
Now, you may be saying, wait a minute, I don't know, the corn market and the bean market are moving all around, and I haven't really figured out exactly how many acres of corn or beans or wheat or sunflowers or whatever crop I'm going to plant. I don't know exactly my mix, and that's fine. You can take a guess right now and say, you know what? I think this is how I'm going to split my acres up and prepay accordingly. It's perfectly legal to make changes before spring. You say, you know what? Boy, the corn market took a dive and I want to shift more acres into wheat or something like that. You can do that. It's perfectly legal. And with most seed companies, talk about this in advance when you prepay. But with most seed companies, you can say, you know what? I don't need quite as much corn. I may need more soybeans or more sunflowers, or I may need some wheat seed, something like that. You can make those changes. It's perfectly legal.
It's legal, but the whole thing is if the seed company or chemical company or fertilizer company will allow you to do that. So you've got to make sure you're checking into that ahead of time. There aren't a lot of dealers who will do this out there, but there are some who will allow you to switch and still get that early price. You can switch from seed to chemical or over to fertilizer or whatever. You just have to make sure you know what you're doing there. Get all the parameters first, because quite frankly, you're putting this money out and you're trusting that 4 months or 6 months down the road, they're going to take care of you. And that's, I guess, the biggest watch out with this whole prepay thing. Make sure you know where that money's going to and that they are financially stable.
The other thing you may be considering prepaying is equipment. And there are some different rules. Equipment is not the same as some of the crop inputs that we talked about. You can't just automatically deduct 100%. So you do need to talk to your CPA because there are some specific rules when it comes to equipment. It's another thing you can definitely prepay before the first of the year.
So once again, we do believe in prepaying. You want to prepay as much as you possibly can to delay your tax bill as many years as possible, just so you get to use that operating money rather than let the government use it for many years. Just make sure you know who you're prepaying to, that they are financially sound, and they'll allow you to switch things back and forth with seed, chemical, and fertilizer and specific product choices come spring.
Well, we'll talk about some of those product choices that relate to controlling our Weed of the Week. It's coming up next.
Hefty Seed Company is proud to sponsor today's Weed of the Week. At Hefty's, you'll always get a great price and solid agronomy information.
We're Hefty! And we're big on the farm.
Well, our Weed of the Week goes by many names, and as you travel around the country, you may hear it called Queen Anne's lace. You may hear it called bird's nest. In our part of the country, we just call it wild carrot. It's a tough biennial weed that you may have on your farm.
Well, the trouble with this particular weed is it is a biennial. It's got a 2-year life cycle. So in the first year, what's going to happen is it's going to be in the rosette stage come fall. It's going to remain low to the ground so it can survive the winter, basically. And in year 2, it'll go into the bolt stage. So it is going to get a little taller. It is going to put seeds on. That's the only way it reproduces is by seed. And you want to make sure you're getting it before it goes to seed, because otherwise you got to control it for the next 20 years.
Yeah, it would be a great idea to get it in the rosette stage if at all possible, because then you aren't worried about it spreading by seed. Now, depending on where you have wild carrot, it's something that can pop up just about anywhere. Sometimes you'll see it out in pastures or ditches. Sometimes it does make it out into fields, whether it's corn, soybeans, or wheat. We've had to kill it in all those crops, so we'll give you a couple of tips on what you can do. In soybeans, Roundup Ready beans are definitely the best, because then Roundup does an excellent job on a biennial weed. A lot of the products like your Flex Stars or Cobra are just going to do some burning on the top growth, and they aren't going to get down deep in the taproot. How about corn?
Well, corn, if it was me, I'd probably go with Status, Distinct, Clarity, something like that, one of the dicamba products. I'm not that concerned about it in corn because we've got a bunch of good options there. In wheat, it does get a little bit more challenging.
Well, there are a few products that are labeled for Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot, whatever you want to call it. Finesse and Glean, Starane Salvo, Starane Sword, they're all labeled. The important thing is just to identify wild carrot out in the field, see which stage it's in, and then make sure you hit it with something hard before it spreads and gets to be a big issue.
Yeah, but fortunately, it's not a big problem in fields. It's usually just in ditches and pastures where 2,4-D will clean it up fine. It's just you're going to want to up your rate of 2,4-D. Instead of the 1 quart per acre of LV6 you might normally use, you might have to bump it to 2 to 3 quarts or switch over to Tordon. Tordon does a good job. Just make sure you keep Tordon away from water and away from trees that you want to save. Because Tordon is lethal to fish and trees.
All right, well, our Weed of the Week again is wild carrot. Get it under control on your farm. That's it for the Weed of the Week, but there's more Ag PhD to come after this.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH. For more information about the full line of Case IH equipment and how you can boost your productivity, visit caseih.com. Case IH, for those who demand more.
Thinking about upgrading sprayers this year, I've got some tips for you in today's Iron Talk. Well, a new sprayer seems to be on the top of the list for many farm operations this winter, and there are some deals to be had out there too. So if you're looking for a new sprayer, I've got a few things that you'll want to include in that deal to make sure the sprayer you get is something that will be useful for you for many years to come. One of the things that a lot of farmers are upgrading sprayers for is boom size. If you've got a 45-foot or a 60-foot boom, you're probably looking at upgrading to an 80, a 90-foot boom, maybe even a 120-foot boom. Boom size is very important. You can get a lot more work done quicker. If you've got solid seeded crops, especially like small grains, that's that many fewer trips you need to make across the field. The other thing that people aren't thinking about is in soybeans with soybean aphids. You can get the work done much more timely, and also when you get taller beans, if you have aphids come late, like into August, you're running over that many fewer soybeans, and it really makes it worth doing in many cases where you had to hire a custom applicator to come in. You can now do it yourself. One of the other things that you don't think about so often on your sprayer is how many times you're going to change those tips. Believe me, if you've got just a spot for one tip every spot down the line, it's a pain in the butt. There's a lot of things to do, and you really hate to be back there messing around when you're supposed to be spraying. So get a triple nozzle body or even a 5 nozzle body on your sprayer. That way you just have to make one little click as you move around, and you can change everything out, change all the tips on your boom that you're using in just a matter of a couple of minutes. One other feature that's really nice is if you have a cone inductor. If you're buying a self-propelled sprayer, many of the new models now have an option where you can have a cone inductor that folds down right to ground level. So if you're mixing ammonium sulfate in, you don't have to climb on top of that sprayer to dump it in. It's really handy. It's a great option to have. Definitely include that in what you're doing. Finally, the last thing to consider is the spray tank. Do you want a 1,000-gallon tank or a 1,500-gallon tank? You're going to have a lot more water out there so you can get more acres done, but the sacrifice is you're going to have more compaction. So you need to consider what size tires you're using if you're going to put a 1,500-gallon water tank on. The other thing that I think may be even more important and is often overlooked is, do I want a poly tank or do I want a stainless steel tank? The stainless steel tank is so much better for contamination issues and tank cleanout issues. I would strongly recommend it if it's not too expensive for you to do. But if you do have a poly tank, that's fine as well. Just make sure that you're doing a really good job rinsing it. I would for sure have a rinse tank on to rinse either a poly or a stainless steel tank. You'll be very happy you did. So if you're considering buying a brand new sprayer this year, it's a great time to do so. There are some extra deductions you could get this year if you talk to your CPA and get a great deal on a sprayer. That's it for today's Iron Talk. And now, back to the show.
And now, a random moment with the Hefties.
Hey, Brian, do you ever remember the studio being this big?
I'd say we shrunk, because recent studies are showing that buildings just aren't growing like they used to.
Oh, you think you're funny, do you?
Well, someone has to have a sense of humor.
Well, comedian, what's up with that fake smile?
Whoa, look who's talking. You gonna make that face all day long?
Ha-ha! At least I have a cool superpower.
Real mature, there, boy. Real mature.
Micronutrients are not optional for your plants, they are essential. And TJ Micromix is essential to complete your fertilizer program. TJ Micromix is increasing yields on corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa like no other micronutrient product. Call your fertilizer dealer today to secure TJ Micromix. By the way, TJ Micromix is a great complement to our latest product release, Quick Roots. TJ Micromix, it's the little things that make a big difference.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wensman of Wensman Seed. Corn growers have a tremendous profit opportunity in 2008. Wensman leads the way to bigger yields next season with the introduction of our 10 new YieldGuard VT3 triple hybrids in our best genetics. These hybrids range in maturity from 80-day to 107-day. Try Wensman's powerful YieldGuard VT3 triple stack hybrids and make more money on your farm in 2008.
So, you were busy farming last week and missed Ag PhD? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Visit our website at agphd.com and catch up on anything you missed. Just click Watch Ag PhD online, and you can catch up on the Weed of the Week, the Ag Minute, and all the great agronomic topics from our show. We know watching Ag PhD is your second favorite thing to do. When it's time to farm, you've got to farm. We've made viewing Ag PhD easier and more convenient, so you can always fit us into your busy schedule. Check us out at agphd.com.
Well, that's our time for today, but be sure to join us again next time for another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.